Hello everybody and welcome. I hope you've been enjoying the start of Mystic Week. I'm here with Eric to do another one of these videos to how to make the Mystic class easier to play. Notably, we did this during Rogue Week, and I was like, there's no way Eric's going to want to do this for Mystics. I'm like, Mystics are easy. And then you said
that I wanted to do it for Mystics.
Yeah.
and I actually said it for two specific reasons. One, I don't know if you've ever watched me play this game, but I'm terrible at Mystics. And second, I realized that Mystics are actually a really hard class for a player who doesn't understand the game very well, or might still be new, depending on your vibes on that, because Mystics have a second economy.
Yes.
And it's hard.
And it was one of those things that I was actively, because when I was planning Mystic Week, I was like, I want to do something with Eric, but there's no way we're going to do to make the class easier to play because Mystics are easy. And then you got me thinking about it, and I was like, there is actually such a big dividing line to what can make a successful Mystic and an unsuccessful Mystic. Because I think the concept of Mystics is actually pretty simple. You use your willpower, your brain for everything, and you're going to have assets in play that are going to use those things. But I have seen it, I have experienced it, I have felt it, where it all falls apart with Mystics.
Yeah.
So, Mystics seem relatively simple at first glance, but there are a lot of complexities that can turn a successful Mystic into an unsuccessful one. I have two here, namesake Mystics, Akachi and Agnes. They both have 5 willpower, 5 brain, so like that's a very common thing for Mystics. 5 brain is a very good thing. Because of the thing, you may notice some struggles with the Mystic class, especially at lower player counts. This is because generally Myst is a class that is built around specific cards in their deck, and unlike other classes, if they lack those pieces, it is hard to accomplish their goal. While Rogue is the combo class, Mystic is kind of the set it and not forget it, but like the set it down and use it class. And you might be thinking, let's go back to these guys just for a second, that playing a spell asset like Shriveling to fight with is not unlike playing with a gun, right?
Yeah.
And it is. A Shriveling spell is essentially a firearm weapon. It has limited uses and it deals damage. However, if a Guardian's firearm runs out of bullets, they still have 4 or 5 fists that they can fight with. If a Mystic runs out of bullets, let's just look at Akachi and Agnes, they have 3 and 2. Likewise with them, they have 2 in their book, which means if their clue spell runs out of uses, they aren't exactly doing anything. And it was while I was putting this together that I realized that this would be like the core philosophy of the video. Managing your deck and your assets to get the best use out of them. So we're kind of like, I'm putting a little bit spoiler for this next one, but this video is going to here offer some suggestions on how to make the Mystic class easier to approach, deck build, and play. But before we get into all that, what is it that makes the Mystic class so fragile? And I think that's the perfect word for it, is they're fragile. It's a very fragile class, but not in the way that people think, because let me start before I get into this.
Yeah.
What is the Mystic class to you, like, gameplay-wise? What does the Mystic class make you think of?
The Mystic class, to me, feels like a class that... This is going to sound so negative, but I'm doing it. We're going for it.
Yeah.
I feel like the Mystic class, to me, is the class that every time I've tried to go near it has been the most, like, you need to take this rosary. You need to take this piece of tech. You then need to have that piece of tech, and you need to be playing spell events or spell effects that have to be in your hand at the right time to get usage out of them, or else you're dead. And that's what it has always felt like to me, was that the Mystic class has to be, like, so good about their card choices that there's no room for mistakes, and you have to get the right draws too. Yeah,
so you also have the unfortunate benefit of playing, it's a pro and a con of playing a 2-player.
Yeah.
Where I think, like, especially like a Mystic fighter is at its weakest. There's one of those things where I've said it every time before I start a campaign, where if I'm a Mystic fighter and 2-player, I'm like, this is going to be hard. Until I find a tool that doesn't rely on charges, I'm going to have a hard time. And the reason for this is that the tools are weaker. Like going back to Shriveling versus the 45 automatic. The 45 automatic gives you +1 fist when you fight, right? Which for a lot of fighters is going to get you to 5, 6 for some of them, right? With Mystics, you don't get that brain boost on the level 0 Shriveling. So you're going to be at, once again, 5 or 4, but that matters so much more when you do not have a good option to fight if you miss a shot. Missing a shot on a gun hurts a lot less than missing a shot with a mystic spell, and it's that need for redundancy is what makes the class so fragile.
Yeah.
Another thing that again, the fragile might make some people think that's strange because the Mystic class has the most encounter deck manipulation and protection for the Mythos phase. But they're really good at stopping treacheries, but are they as efficient as stopping enemies or advancing the game without proper deck building?
That's exactly what I'm talking about, yes.
And I think that is the issue that a lot of people will have with Mystics, that they might not realize until they play with the class a few times and then start to identify the problems that exist there. So a lot of this stuff is going to be on this list of the things that you need to do for Mystics. And I do agree that when you're just starting out, the easiest thing to do with the Mystic class as you're learning them is just put in the staples. You're going to want your Brain Boost and Holy Rosary or in something else. You're going to want your spell assets and your redundancy of your spell assets. These are all things we're going to be covering here. And then when you get deeper, and you'll see this later on in Mystic Week, we're going to be building decks that do not use these staples in the Mystic class that are still capable of getting the job done. And there's a lot of options now that there were before. And let's dive in and get this going. So, look at that. Good segue into the segue. All right, number one, learn to identify what the key pieces in your deck are in order to fill your deck's role. So, Jacqueline Fine is actually just another great example that fits with Akachi and Agnes earlier. 5 brain, but then when you run out of your spell charges, you're going to be left sitting there being like, what am I supposed to do? There's a lot of Mystics that you actually find that have 4 or 5 brain, but they also have 4 or 5 book. Those are generally the Mystics that are easier to play because if they run out of charges on their spell asset, they can still advance the game state. And it's why when I say for fighters, it's a lot harder, and why a 2-player Mystic fighter, I'm going to be like, this is going to be a tough time. And I think we saw that was Dexter. You were a Dexter fighter. And like there were moments where you shone and you were like, I'm kicking ass right now. Mm-hmm. But then there were moments when you ran out of your uses and you were probably like, what am I even doing?
Yeah, I'm dead. I'm dead and I have no options.
Yeah. So the thing that's most important when you first start building your deck is you have to identify what the key pieces are in order to fulfill your deck's role. So if you are a fighter, you're going to look at any sort of spell asset or spell event that deals damage. Additionally, you need to go a step further and ask yourself what on this card is actually doing the damage. And that is the charges, right? So then you need to find ways to ensure that you're either getting more charges, which we're going to be talking about in a later tip, or more ways that you can deal damage, so that is redundancy in spells, which we're also going to talk about on this list, or in ways that you can deal damage without using your charge things and still find ways to sneak out damage that way.
Interesting.
Likewise with clues, you're going to want to do the same thing, right? Like if you're investigating, but you only have, let's say in Jacqueline Fine's use here, only 3 book. There's a lot of options you can do for this. You can play Rite of Seeking, more mystic events and spells that get clues, or you can find ways to mitigate tests in your favor, which these are all kind of just a preview for the tips that are going to come. But the most important thing is you need to identify how you are going to accomplish your goal of either fighting, getting clues, or a mix of both. Notably, if you want to play a support mystics are very good. I think support mystics are very nice, but you can't really do that in 2-player. And this video is going to be primarily targeted at 2 to 3 players, because in 4 players you can kind of do a little bit of a free-for-all. Tip 2, Mystic class is the class that benefits the most from deck redundancy, but this doesn't necessarily just mean only play more of the spell assets. So for both Shriveling and Rite of Seeking, I've included a comparable card in the form of Azure Flame and Clairvoyance. Generally, when I'm playing, I'm going to be running 2 of each of those baseline. But then I look at all the other events, the other spells, spell assets, and like I could do things like find another fight spell. They release 1 every cycle usually. There's something that you can pull from. Or alternatively, I look for ways that I can deal damage through other assets. So you can see here in Sword Cane, and I'm pretty sure you played this in Dexter because this is a card that works really well for Dexter. It's a way for you to deal damage that's not just a spell asset. It's another reason why Spectral Razor is well regarded as a powerful card, because it deals 3 damage. And as we've said previously in the past, one of the scariest things about firearms and spells is that they only deal 2 damage. And if an enemy has 3 damage, which we're also going to get to in a future tip coming up here, that's bad. Because then you're stuck with a very hard point. So having something like Spectral Razor that just zaps for 3 damage is really, really good. Notably, what you can also do is find there's starting to be more cards. Actually, I'm going to say that for the next one. This is just deck redundancy. We'll get to that what I was about to say in a second. But you can also see that for Rite of Seeking, we have Dowsing Rod as a way to, as another tool to get there. Again, I do think that the book side is so much easier than the fist side for like Clue versus fighters. And a big reason for that is something that I've been yelling for a long time. There's not a 4-fist Mystic. And I want a 4-fist Mystic because I do inherently think it will solve these issues that I'm talking about here. And it's why you see so many Clover Mystics compared to Fighter Mystics.
Ozymandias.
Ozymandias, yes.
Let's release our 4-fist Mystic.
Yes, I agree. But what this typically comes down to is when you think you have enough, add 4 more. Is what it really comes down to.
Okay, that big.
Mostly just, okay, so this is where we're going to get a little bit of into the deeper levels of deck building. Mystics are a late game deck. You never got to experience that with Dexter because unfortunately, Dexter died. He got locked in the asylum, so he didn't come out.
And Luke Robinson was a Clover, which was a lot easier.
Yes, and you actually did see that there. He became powerful as it goes because Mystics have so many tools to help their XP scaling, and we're going to get into that later on. So you want to have more redundancy at level 0, and then you can start shrinking that down when you find ways to make those cards more powerful, or alternatively, you have tutors and recursions. So you're not actually replacing them with something new, you're just making it more consistent to find your powerful things. And this is like the baseline simplest Mystic approach. Yeah. All right, so let's go with one thing that I was kind of poning on, which is determine when you should use your key assets and when you should use another tool, which I think is like one of the hardest things to understand when you first start playing a Mystic. Luckily, this explanation I have here with the rats is kind of easy because it only has 1 fist.
Yeah.
But let's just say, for example, Ravenous Ghoul, right? Ravenous Ghoul is a core set monster that has 3 attack, 3 health, and 3 evade. Most Mystics, as the fighters, would be like, okay, I'm going to use my Shriveling for my first attack. But then, if you use Shriveling for your second attack, you have basically just dropped 1 damage on the table. When you're a fighter, that matters less because 1, you are probably using a melee weapon or you have your base fist value which can do things with. With the Mystic, you might have to use your Shriveling and thus waste a damage, or alternatively, if your deck has redundancy and you have alternate forms of damage, that can be a way for you to do things. So that's what the Sword Cane here. Sword Cane exhausts and it deals 1 damage if you fight with it. Anything in a Mystic class, especially in 2-player, that deals 1 damage is very good. There was a spell asset, Wither, that we all made fun of here at PBG for some time, but I think it's in a pretty healthy place now. That's a level 0 and level 4 arcane slot spell asset that just fights with your brain and doesn't use charges, but it always only deals 1 damage. Even in the upgraded version. But if you reveal a symbol token, one of the Mythos symbol tokens, you can reduce the fight value, and on the upgraded version, the health value. So it's like you're dealing 2 damage.
Interesting.
So that is a way that you can then necessarily cut down on some extra redundancy, because if you have a continual way that you can get clues or fight in 1-point values, can really impact like the decisions you make for your deck.
Yeah.
So like Rite of Seeking here as well, let's just say, for example, you had one clue left on Burned Runes, and it's kind of awkward to have to use your Rite of Seeking again, because again, you're dropping a clue on the table. So that's why things like Occult Theory, which allows you to add your brain to your book or your book to your brain, can be a really nice tool. Dowsing Rod, on the last one here, is something that you can just investigate endlessly with. Notably, there is an alternative to Wither that does get clues. It's called Sixth Sense. Card is pretty good, especially if you're building around it, and it just lets you investigate without spending a charge.
Ooh.
Drowned City, the newest cycle that just came out, in North America last week, has an asset that gets clues and fights without spending charges. So there's some more things there. If you have a way to do those things, you can actually cut down on the excess things in your deck, because it solves the biggest problem, which is that 3rd or 5th point of health. Or in even some cases, that 4th point of health. Like, if you only have one shot on your Shriveling, and you're fighting a 4th point enemy, but you have a Spectral Razor in hand, you use your Spectral Razor and then use your Sword Cane or your 1 point of damage to finish that enemy off. This is where you can really level up your Mystic gameplay, which is they're like a puzzle each turn of the most efficient use of their resources.
Interesting.
Fighters just say, I stab. Like, they just... Seekers, they can build very good Book v Shroud decks, right? But, like... They have an easier thing of getting that excess clue or that excess damage. Mystics, not so much. So that should be, if you're like the fighter, your first question, like after you identify your thing, your next question should be, how am I going to solve those enemies that have 3 health consistently? Assuming that one is drawn every turn. Because that can be something that does happen occasionally in 2-player, and those will be the times when you notice you're going to fall behind. This is also why Promise of Power is so good. The 4 wild icons put a curse in the bag. It's good because you can use it defensively, but you can also use it offensively. Turning your 2 fist into 6 fist, or your 3 fist into 7 fist.
Just to get that 1 damage
exactly,
out.
Right? And like that is like a fine use of the card. Because again, Mystics are really good at defending themselves in the Mythos phase. And I think if you're just starting out, this might be the hardest advice to follow, but probably the best advice you can hear. As a Mystic, you can run less defensive options because you generally have 5 brain, so you're already pretty well prepared for them, right? So like maybe don't go crazy, but maybe like turn 2 cards of your deck that were defensive into redundancy for your offensive, and you'll probably have a better shot at it. All right, tip number 4. Look for ways that add more consistency to your game plan. So this is where like Promise of Power could fit in. Things that allow you to draw cards, get your brain higher, have more control over your tests, or add more charges to things are good ways for you to take advantage of the power in the Mystic class and then make everything else stronger. One of the first upgrades I do in most of my Mystic decks while I'm upgrading my spell assets is I turn my Guts into level 2. The main reason for that is it gives me 3 brain, but it also lets me draw 2 cards if I succeed by 2 or more, which is really good for digging through because Mystics kind of have a card draw problem. They kind of, they do. They have issues drawing cards. It's getting better, but I think that like Guardians, they're the class that is having the hardest time with their ability to draw cards.
Interesting.
Holy Rosary is a staple, but it kind of just represents the need to boost your brain. However, there's a great upgraded card that I often talk about called the Jewel of Aureolus, which takes up the accessory slot but doesn't boost your brain. But once per round, you can exhaust it after someone reveals a symbol token to draw 2 cards or gain 2 draw a card or gain 2 resources. So like once you feel capable of stepping away from Holy Rosary, this is where you can actually find a lot of power that exists in the Mystic class in terms of like card draw potential and adding more consistency to your game plan. Because as I was mentioning earlier, level 0 Shriveling doesn't add brain, but like level 3 Shriveling, I believe adds 2 brain. So like already like it's pretty comfortable to like last throughout the whole game with. Grotesque Statue is a core set card. There's also Jacqueline Fine as well, where when you would reveal chaos tokens, you can reveal 2 after spending a charge.
That's really good. I'm surprised I've never seen it.
Yeah, it's one of those things that like, it's a very powerful effect, but like there's better things to do. but like it's still a very strong card, and you just got to like choose one of the 2 tokens to resolve, which usually means a successful test.
Yeah, wow.
And then most recently, this is from Drowned City, this new Enraptured. Charge economy has changed. The new designers have kind of just like said that at high XP levels, we don't care if you get charges really easily. This is a practice skill where if you succeed, you place up to 3 charges or secrets on assets controlled by investigators.
Just 3.
Just 3. And then it also like it's also this redundancy where like, for example, as Luke Robinson, you can play practice makes perfect to pull it out and like just keep like, doing it over and over again. But like even just as a way for you to and notably it also has a wild icon. So just as a way for you to commit to a test and just like if you're like using it to fight, you can play that while fighting and then kill the enemy and get 3 charges back.
That's
right?
wild. That's so good.
Yeah, and then there's also cards like you can eventually upgrade. There's an Uncage the Soul. It's a 0-cost event where it allows you to play a spell asset from your hand, reducing its cost by 3. The upgraded version allows you to play from your discard pile, but you may discard a spell asset and play first. So it's basically like that consistency and redundancy is... It's like another copy of that spell.
You throw away your shriveling then play it back with its full charges again.
And this is also really well for things like the Edge of the Earth ones like Brand of Cthugga, which have a lot of charges. There's also events that, there's an event, Ghastly Possession, where you can refill half the charges on something, right? So like, look for those tools to build around to make your spells refill more, and like you'll have that power. With all this said, it might sound like you're building around some assets and then only using those assets. And unfortunately, for the most part, that's true. That's why I'm not afraid to say that Mystic is my least favorite class. Because one, I think they're on haul the weakest. But I think that there's some fun things you can do once you get past and learn this understanding, and you can start doing some really fun things. Like, if I'm playing 3 or 4 player, I'll gravitate towards Mystics because they're really fun there. But in 2 player, they're a little bit, you kind of have to, like, focus hard.
Yeah.
However, let's talk about the best part of the Mystic class, which is the downsides. Embrace the downsides. They are powerful, important, and sometimes necessary. So when I say the downsides, I mean Mystics have a lot of cards that do something negative to you or the group, but you get a very positive effect. So Deliverance is a new card that just came out where when the encounter step begins, you draw each card and the first card you draw gains Surge. But when you're a Mystic and you're really well prepared for having Mythos management or like just 5 brain, it's not big of an issue. But then the next turn, everyone skips drawing encounter cards.
Holy cow.
So you basically tank an encounter phase and your teammates get 2 turns without drawing encounter cards, which is very nice.
Pretty sick.
Draw into the flame, you draw the top card of the encounter deck, discover 2 clues of your location. This is some redundancy on the clue side. I would love if there was a damage version of this that was just draw the top card of the encounter deck, deal 3 damage to an enemy location. This action does not provoke attacks of opportunity. That would be an incredible card. Even if it just said fight, draw the top card of the encounter deck, give us that card. That would be very good. That would be honestly one of the most key things on making the Mystic class. I think just have suddenly like a and that 4-fist Mystic, Ozymandias.
Yeah.
Down the Rabbit Hole and Arcane Research are 2 examples of some of that XP scaling. So they allow you to upgrade your deck quicker, better, faster. Arcane Research, if you can take 2 of them at the cost of 1 mental trauma each, allows you to reduce the cost of the first spell you upgrade by 1. So for 2 of them, your first upgraded spell is 2 less, which means you can spend 1 experience for a 3 experience shriveling, right? Down the Rabbit Hole, you can... The first 2 cards you upgrade, you reduce the cost by 1, which means if you have Down the Rabbit Hole and 2 Arcane Researches, your first shriveling is free. And that's usually why I often end up buying Guts first, because my first 1 experience that I put into my deck is for an upgraded shriveling to level 3 and a Guts level 2. So that's usually like the game plan I follow. There are some downsides to both of these cards, but the idea is that you make up for those downsides by just being better. And then Delve Too Deep, which, as you know, is a powerful card, but can have some downsides of maybe locking Dexter in an asylum.
Yes. Yes.
But it's one of those things where it gives everybody experience, and yeah, I think these are like key parts of the Mystic class that you should embrace to just make your decks better. And in the form of Down the Rabbit Hole and Arcane Research, unfortunately, just with the way the Mystic class is, they are kind of just like necessary pieces of the Mystic pie at this point, because their decks were designed around having a lot of experience, but the early campaigns didn't have that experience. But now all the numbers on the cards are built with that in mind, right? So like that is kind of like the issue that I'm curious when rotation starts happening, if that means that that's not going to happen anymore, which would be really nice. Finally, the last tip. Use your off-class pool to boost your ability to get your job done or provide your deck with extra consistency. Just because you're a Mystic doesn't mean you have to put in, for example, a machete and fight with it, but if you have Guardian access, you can use things like toe-to-toe to deal damage. If you're a Seeker, and one of the reasons why Luke Robinson is so powerful, apart from the 9 other reasons, is that he can draw cards really well with the Seeker class or get clues really well with the Seeker class. Agnes is really good because she has ways to deal ping damage by taking horror, and her off-class Survivor allows her to soak horror or heal horror really easily.
Interesting.
Look What I Found lets you get clues, which is really nice when you have low book, and At a Crossroads is just like an example of a card draw card. These are just 4 examples, but like look in your off-class for things that deal damage or get clues or draw cards, because those are the things that like the Mystic class kind of has the biggest issue just generally with. So don't be afraid to lean on that.
I hate every time we do these videos. I don't want to play a rogue anymore. I want to play a Mystic.
I mean, that's a good sign. That's a good sign.
Yeah.
1, because it's obviously compelling conversation, but 2, it means you want to play more Arkham. So, yeah. No, sorry, you're stuck with your next rogue, which we can't say yet. No one knows that, but Eric's playing a rogue in our next campaign. As always the case, the best way to learn a class in Arkham is by trying stuff out and see what works and what doesn't. If you notice that you run out of the ability to do damage or get clues too early, try and ask yourself what are the reasons that this could be happening. Solving that will improve your ability to play the Mystic class. Before we get to this, did you have any other thoughts or comments you wanted me to touch on this? Or
no, this is phenomenal, and like it does such a great job too of talking about like, yeah, these are why you have to have these standard assets. But things like I never was interested in things like Spectral Razor or Sword Cane and stuff like that because I didn't really understand their place.
Yeah.
And understanding better now that like you need answers that aren't charges, or you really need to go hard on finding those charges and hunting down those charges there's so much more I could have done with Dexter had I understood this. And especially too, I think the big thought of, listen, you've already got 5 brain. You're probably going to be more okay than you think. On the defense would have helped me a lot. I think every single Mystic I've built in our campaigns has gone like, not quite 30% fight the Mythos deck, but as a Mystic who's already good at the Mythos deck, you're like, yeah, I want to be good at this thing. I want to give a finger to the Eldritch Horror, but you don't really need to.
Yeah.
Because yeah, it's just taking away tools from actually advancing the game state.
Yeah, and it just kind of happens naturally if you're doing that, right? So like, if you're a new player and you have a full collection, my recommendation is 2 Promise of Powers and 2 Ward of Protections, and you're probably good.
Yeah.
If you don't like Ward of Protections for some reason, change them out for Deny Existences, and like that's kind of like all you really need, which is, yeah.
Well, and the idea of using Promise of Power to fight just once for 1 punch feels bad until you realize, yeah, that is your chip damage, and you are a class that needs to build for that.
And I mean, like, it's one of those things that's really interesting, because if you just change the perspective, where if you look at enemies as treacheries, right, like you have to spend actions to do them, but like using your Promise of Power to kill an enemy is pretty much equivalent to using it to pass a Mythos card that would deal you damage, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's wild. I've never considered that angle.
That's why the game is so good. Like, there's a lot of things. This is
why you use kill spells in the first 2 rounds of Magic if you're a mono black player. I don't care if it's a 1/1 or a 2/1.
Yeah, just take them off the board.
Kill it before the combos start. This is not actually good advice, but this is how I play.
Yeah. But yeah, no, it's this was a very good video for me to even poke at, because like I was like, oh, Mystics are easy. You play the assets and then you boost your brain and then you get consistency. But sometimes like I need to remember that not everyone has been playing since the game came out, you know? Not everyone had to, like, learn that Mystics are worse. Fighter Mystics are very fragile in 2-player, and actually putting this out here in a video was very helpful for me
This is actually the second Justin. The first Justin did streams before this, and the new Justin was actually extruded by Fantasy Flight Games when Arkham was released, and has literally been playing it his whole life.
It's true, it's true,
Yeah.
it's true. All right, well, thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoy the rest of Mystic Week. Are we doing this for Survivor too?
Yes,
yeah,
please.
Okay, we'll do it for Survivor.
Especially because I had such a good time with that one Survivor,
Stella.
but then everyone kept saying without Stella, Eric wouldn't be having as good a time. And I'm like, okay, tell me.
It's true.
Tell
It's
me
very
how
true.
real Survivors work.
All right, I will do that for sure, because Survivor is my favorite class. It's the week I've been looking forward to the most. So we'll do this again for Survivor Week. But in the meantime, thanks for watching, everybody. Have a good one, and as always, GG's.